The music pulsed through the rented historic mansion, a heavy bass line vibrating up through the polished parquet floor and into the soles of my ridiculously expensive heels. Heels I'd bought specifically for this night. Daniel's match day party. The culmination of 4 grueling years of medical school. The night he and his classmates would find out where they'd spend the next phase of their lives as resident physicians. I scanned the crowded room, searching for his familiar sandy hair amidst the sea of eager, anxious faces. He was holding court near the elaborate ice sculpture, shaped like a caduceus, naturally, laughing with a group of his classmates. He caught my eye and waved me over, but just as I started weaving through the throng, I heard his voice, louder now, carrying over the music. "Seriously, man, look at this place. Only the best for the future Dr. Harding." That was Mark, his study partner. Daniel laughed, a sound that usually warmed me but now sent a chill down my spine. "Yeah, well, Clara handled everything. Good thing her little coffee shop job pays well enough for these splurges, right?" His friends chuckled knowingly. Then came the words that stopped me cold, right there between the champagne fountain and a platter of artisanal cheeses I'd painstakingly selected. "Honestly," Daniel continued, lowering his voice slightly but not enough, "she doesn't really fit in here, does she? Sweet girl, but totally out of her depth with this crowd. It's fine for now, but long term." He didn't finish the sentence, letting Mark clap him on the back. I stood frozen, invisible in the crush of bodies, the expensive champagne suddenly tasting like ash in my mouth. Clara handled everything. He wasn't wrong. I, Clara Hayes, barista and aspiring cafe owner, had orchestrated and paid for this entire lavish affair. The venue deposit, the 5-star catering, the top-shelf open bar, even the valet parking, all charged to the credit card linked to the savings account I'd been building since high school, the account meant for my own dream of opening a small independent bookstore cafe. Daniel, burdened by student loans and the perceived austerity of med school life, couldn't possibly afford such extravagance. I'd offered to host, wanting him to have this perfect night, this celebration of his monumental achievement, dismissing his weak protests about the cost. "It's my gift to you," I'd insisted. "You deserve it." Now, his casual dismissal, the implication that I, the woman who funded this entire spectacle, didn't belong, felt like a physical blow. He hadn't just insulted me. He'd weaponized my own generosity against me in front of his peers. The room started to spin, the laughter and music blending into a discordant roar. I backed away slowly, unseen, unheard, my heart fracturing with each beat of the heavy bass. I somehow made it out of the mansion and onto the rain-slicked street, hailing a cab with a trembling hand. The reflection in the window showed a ghost. Pale face, haunted eyes, expensive dress clinging damply. Who was that woman? The supportive girlfriend, the tireless cheerleader, the one who worked double shifts at the daily grind so Daniel could focus solely on his studies? The woman who'd put her own dreams on indefinite hold, believing his success would eventually become our success? That woman felt suddenly, irrevocably naive. Back in the small apartment we shared, the one where I paid the larger share of the rent because his stipend barely covered textbooks, the silence was deafening. I sank onto the worn sofa, the one I'd found on clearance, and let the tears come. Not just for his cruel words, but for the years of subtle dismissals I'd ignored. The times he'd corrected my grammar in front of his parents, the way he'd explained complex medical concepts to me using patronizingly simple terms, the suggestions that maybe I should take some online courses, broaden my horizons beyond coffee and pastries, the friends of his I'd never quite clicked with, the ones whose wives were lawyers or researchers, women who understood the demands of his world in a way I apparently couldn't. He hadn't just said I didn't belong at his party, he'd been telling me I didn't belong in his life all along. I pulled out my phone, intending to call him, to demand an explanation, but my finger hovered over his contact. What was the point? His words hadn't been a slip of the tongue. They were a window into his soul. revealing a condescending core I'd refused to see. He saw me as temporary, convenient, a supportive placeholder until someone more suitable came along. The phrase echoed Diana Montgomery's assessment, a comparison that chilled me. I opened my banking app instead. The balance in my savings account stared back accusingly, nearly depleted. The venue, the caterer, the bar tab. Thousands of dollars spent celebrating a man who saw me as disposable. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. How could I have been so blind, so foolish? I thought about my bookstore cafe dream, the carefully curated collection of first editions I kept in storage, the business plan I'd spent years refining. It all felt impossibly distant now, sacrificed on the altar of Daniel's ambition. I spent the rest of the night oscillating between heartbroken sobbing and cold, hard anger. When Daniel finally stumbled in around 3 a.m., smelling of expensive liquor and cheap victory, I pretended to be asleep. He didn't try to wake me, just shed his clothes and collapsed onto his side of the bed, oblivious to the chasm that had opened between us. Lying there in the darkness, listening to his heavy breathing, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my pain or the chance to manipulate his way back with apologies he didn't mean. I would simply disappear. The next morning, while Daniel slept off his celebration, I packed a single suitcase with essentials, my art supplies, and the small tin box containing the seed money I'd managed to salvage before the party expenses cleared. I looked around the apartment, at the life I thought we were building, and felt nothing but emptiness. I left my key on the kitchen counter next to a copy of the fully paid invoice for his match day party, circling the total amount, $18,742.38, in red ink. No note, no explanation, just the silent testament to my contribution and his betrayal. I walked out without looking back, dialing my best friend Maya as I headed for the bus station. Operation Phoenix is a go, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I need a place to crash. Maya didn't ask questions, just gave me directions to her sister's place in Portland, Oregon, a city on the other side of the country, far away from the life and the man who believed I didn't belong. The bus journey felt like traversing purgatory. 3 days suspended between a past that had imploded and a future that was terrifyingly blank. My phone remained off, buried deep in my suitcase. I knew Daniel would be trying to reach me, probably oscillating between feigned concern and annoyance at my disappearance. Let him wonder. Let him feel the unease of uncertainty for once. Maya's sister, Chloe, lived in a tiny, brightly painted house in a neighborhood filled with artists, musicians, and vintage shops. It felt like landing on a different planet compared to the sterile academic environment I'd left behind. Chloe, a whirlwind of kinetic energy and paint-splattered overalls, welcomed me with open arms and zero judgment. Maya filled me in, she said, handing me a mug of strong coffee. He sounds like a first-class idiot. You're better off. Her immediate acceptance was a balm to my bruised spirit. The guest room was barely bigger than a closet, but it had a window overlooking a community garden and smelled faintly of turpentine and possibility. For the first time in days, I slept through the night. The initial days in Portland were a blur of disorientation. Everything felt foreign. The persistent drizzle, the smell of damp earth and pine needles, the laid-back rhythm of the city. My savings were dwindling faster than I'd anticipated. Finding work proved harder than I'd hoped. My barista skills were solid, but my resume lacked the kind of polish Portland's competitive job market seemed to demand. Rejection emails piled up. Doubt began to creep in, whispering insidious questions. Had Daniel been right? Was I truly out of my depth? Was my dream of a bookstore cafe just a naive fantasy? One particularly bleak afternoon, after bombing yet another interview, I found myself wandering through the aisles of Powell's Books, the city's legendary independent bookstore. Surrounded by towering stacks of stories, the familiar scent of aging paper and binding glue, I felt a flicker of my old self return. This was where I belonged. This was the dream I'd almost sacrificed. But how could I possibly achieve it now, starting from scratch in a new city with barely enough money for next month's rent at Chloe's? Defeated, I sank onto a bench near the rare book section. That's when an elderly woman with startlingly bright blue eyes and silver hair braided down her back sat beside me. "Lost your way, child?" she asked gently. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and she owned a small, struggling antiquarian bookstore tucked away in a quieter part of the city. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About books, about dreams, about the way life sometimes throws you curveballs that knock you clean off your feet. I found myself telling her everything. The med school boyfriend, the party, the betrayal, the flight across the country. She listened patiently, nodding occasionally, her gaze never leaving mine. "Sounds like you traded a gilded cage for a chance at flight," she observed when I finished. "The question is, are you ready to build your own wings?" She scribbled something on a napkin. "My shop needs help, dusting, cataloging, dealing with eccentric collectors. Doesn't pay much, but it's quiet, and you'd be surrounded by what you love. Come by tomorrow if you're interested." The address was for Vance & Company Fine Books. Hope, fragile but persistent, fluttered in my chest. Maybe this wasn't the end of my dream, but a detour. Vance & Company was exactly as Eleanor had described it. A tiny, cluttered haven smelling of old leather, dust, and lingering pipe tobacco. Sunlight streamed through the single large front window, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny galaxies. Books overflowed from shelves that reached the high ceilings, piled on tables, stacked in corners. It was chaotic, disorganized, and utterly magical. Eleanor greeted me from behind a massive oak desk buried under manuscripts and auction catalogs. "Ready to wrestle some chaos into order?" she asked with a twinkle in her eye. The work was harder than it looked. Cataloging rare editions required meticulous research. Dusting fragile bindings demanded a delicate touch. Dealing with collectors involved deciphering arcane requests and navigating prickly personalities. My barista skills were useless here. Instead, I learned about first editions, provenance, the subtle art of book restoration, and the even subtler art of managing Eleanor's wonderfully eccentric but fiercely loyal clientele. Eleanor became my unlikely mentor. She was sharp, knowledgeable, and possessed a dry wit that often caught me off guard. She rarely offered advice directly, but her observations about literature often seemed to mirror my own life. "Sometimes," she remarked one afternoon, while examining a worn copy of Great Expectations, "the most valuable discoveries are made after our grandest illusions shatter." She taught me the business side too. The careful dance of buying low at estate sales, the research needed to price accurately, the importance of building relationships with dealers and collectors. My confidence grew with each correctly identified first edition, each successfully negotiated sale, each complex cataloging task completed. The small paycheck barely covered my share of Chloe's rent and groceries, but for the first time in years, I felt genuinely engaged, intellectually stimulated, seen. I started sketching again during my lunch breaks, capturing the quirky characters who frequented the shop, the play of light on dusty book spines. The art flowed more easily now, freed from the pressure of proving my worth to Daniel or his family. One rainy Tuesday, Eleanor didn't come into the shop. I found a note on the desk. "Feeling under the weather. Mind the fort, Clara." Concern gnawed at me. Eleanor lived alone above the shop and rarely took sick days. After closing, I locked up and cautiously climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment. I found her pale and weak in bed, a half-empty glass of water on her nightstand. "Just a touch of flu," she insisted, but her breathing was shallow, her skin clammy. I stayed with her, making tea, checking her temperature, reading to her until she drifted off to sleep. The next morning, she was worse. Against her protests, I called an ambulance. At the hospital, the diagnosis came quickly. Severe pneumonia complicated by an underlying heart condition she'd never mentioned. The doctor spoke gravely about her prognosis. She needs complete rest and likely long-term care. My heart sank. What would happen to the bookstore? To Eleanor? I spent the next week juggling shifts at the bookstore, hospital visits, and frantic calls to Eleanor's distant relatives, none of whom seemed willing or able to take responsibility. The shop's finances, I discovered after Eleanor gave me access to her accounts, were precarious. Sales barely covered rent and utilities. She'd been keeping it afloat through sheer willpower and occasional sales of valuable items from her personal collection. Faced with the reality of the shop closing and Eleanor potentially ending up in a state-run facility, I felt a surge of protective determination. Vance & Company wasn't just a job. It was Eleanor's legacy, a sanctuary, a place that had given me refuge when I needed it most. I couldn't let it disappear. Armed with my dusty business plan for a bookstore cafe and a newfound understanding of the rare book market, I approached Chloe and my small circle of Portland artist friends. "I have an idea," I began, spreading Eleanor's financial statements and my cafe proposal across Chloe's kitchen table. "But I can't do it alone." My plan was audacious. Transform the struggling antiquarian bookstore into a vibrant bookstore cafe, combining Eleanor's curated collection with a welcoming community space, good coffee, and locally sourced pastries. We'd host readings, art shows, book clubs, create a hub for the neighborhood's creative energy, while generating enough revenue to support Eleanor's care and keep the bookstore alive. It seemed impossible, a pipe dream fueled by desperation and loyalty. But as I laid out the vision, sharing sketches of the proposed layout, cost projections, and potential revenue streams, something shifted. Chloe caught the spark first. "I could paint murals," she offered. Miguel, a baker friend, added, "I've been looking for a venue to test my new scone recipes." Sarah, a graphic designer, chimed in, "I can handle branding and social media." Within an hour, we had formed an unlikely coalition, pooling our limited resources and diverse talents. We launched a small crowdfunding campaign, leveraging social media and the loyalty of Eleanor's existing clientele. We negotiated with the building's landlord, pitching our vision for a revitalized community space. We spent evenings painting walls, sanding floors, sourcing used cafe equipment, and carefully reorganizing Eleanor's precious book collection. When Eleanor was stable enough for visitors, I showed her our progress reports and design mock-ups. Tears welled in her bright blue eyes. "You took a dying old shop," she whispered, clutching my hand, and breathed new life into it, into me. 3 months after Eleanor's hospitalization, Vance & Company Books & Brew opened its doors. The launch party was a neighborhood block party, crowded, chaotic, filled with music, art, Miguel's amazing scones, and the infectious energy of a community rallying around one of its own. We weren't just selling books and coffee. We were selling connection, creativity, and the belief that even struggling ventures could find new life with enough passion and collaboration. The bookstore cafe thrived beyond our wildest expectations. It became the neighborhood's living room, a place where students studied, artists sketched, writers found inspiration, and lonely souls found community. Eleanor, recovering slowly but steadily in a nearby assisted living facility we could now afford thanks to the cafe's success, held court during her weekly visits, sharing stories with customers and offering surprisingly astute business advice. My role evolved from assistant to manager to co-owner alongside Chloe, Miguel, and Sarah. I learned to manage staff, navigate payroll, negotiate with suppliers, and balance budgets, skills I never knew I possessed. I even started displaying and selling my own artwork alongside other local artists, my sketches finally finding an appreciative audience. Life settled into a fulfilling rhythm. I worked long hours, but they were hours spent building something tangible, something mine, something that mattered. The memory of Daniel and his dismissive words still stung occasionally, but it no longer defined me. I was Clara Hayes, co-owner of a thriving community hub, surrounded by supportive friends, finally living the dream I'd almost given up on. Years passed. Vance & Company Books & Brew became a Portland institution, featured in travel guides and lauded for its unique blend of literary history and community spirit. We opened a second location downtown, expanding our reach while staying true to our roots. Eleanor, though frail, remained our guiding star, her wisdom and sharp wit undiminished. She passed away peacefully 5 years after our cafe opened, leaving the bookstore and its legacy officially in the hands of the unlikely team who had saved it. And in many ways, saved me too. The inheritance included not just the business, but also her personal collection of rare first editions, valued far more than any of us had realized. It secured our financial future and allowed us to establish the Eleanor Vance Foundation, supporting literacy programs and providing microgrants to struggling artists. One crisp autumn afternoon, sorting through a box of Eleanor's papers, I found a faded photograph tucked inside an old copy of Jane Austen. It showed a young Eleanor standing proudly outside the original Vance & Company, her eyes bright with the same determination I now saw in my own reflection. Tucked behind the photo was a brief, handwritten note. To Clara, some cages are gilded, others are built of fear. Find the key, fly. I smiled, tears blurring the ink. She had understood more than she ever let on. It was around this time that Maya called with news from Philadelphia. She hesitated before delivering it. Daniel Harding matched into the cardiothoracic surgery fellowship at OHSU, she said quietly. Oregon Health and Science University, right here in Portland. My heart skipped a beat. After years of silence, the past was suddenly, uncomfortably present. Does he know I'm here? I asked, my voice tight. I don't think so, Maya replied. But Portland isn't that big, Clara. Are you prepared? Prepared? How could anyone be prepared to face the ghost of a past life? The man who had dismissed and betrayed you, now potentially walking the same streets, breathing the same air. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, not of fear, but of something else. A strange, unsettling curiosity. What would happen if our paths crossed again? Would the confident, successful woman I'd become crumble in the face of the man who'd once made her feel so small? I pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the upcoming Vance Foundation annual fundraising gala, our biggest event of the year, held at the Portland Art Museum. It was my responsibility to ensure its success, a testament to Eleanor's legacy and the community we had built. This year's theme was New Beginnings. How fitting. The night of the gala arrived, a whirlwind of final preparations and nervous energy. The museum ballroom looked spectacular, filled with Portland's philanthropic and artistic communities. Our team, Chloe, Miguel, Sarah, and I, stood near the entrance, greeting donors and celebrating our collective success. I wore a vintage-inspired emerald green dress, a nod to Eleanor's favorite color, feeling confident and grounded in the life I had built. Then I saw him. Standing near the silent auction tables, looking slightly lost amidst the unfamiliar faces, was Daniel Harding. Older, lines etched around his eyes from the stress of surgical fellowship, but unmistakably him. He hadn't seen me yet. My first instinct was to flee, to retreat to the safety of the back office. But then I remembered Eleanor's note. Find the key. Fly. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my dress and walked towards him, not as the heartbroken girl he'd dismissed, but as Clara Hayes, co-founder of the Vance Foundation and host of this prestigious event. Daniel, I said, my voice even and calm. He turned, and the shock on his face was palpable. Clara, what are you doing here? The question was so absurd, so revealing of his self-centered perspective, that I almost laughed. I might ask you the same question, I replied coolly. This is my foundation's annual gala. His eyes swept the room, taking in the elegant decor, the prominent guests, the banners bearing the Vance Foundation logo. Comprehension dawned slowly, mixed with disbelief. Your foundation? Mine and my partner's, I clarified, gesturing towards Chloe and Miguel who were watching from a distance, ready to intervene if needed. We revived Vance & Company Books and Brew after Eleanor Vance fell ill. This foundation honors her legacy. Daniel seemed momentarily speechless, struggling to reconcile the successful businesswoman before him with the barista girlfriend he'd so easily discarded. I had no idea, he stammered. You look different. I am different, I agreed. Life has a way of changing us. Wouldn't you agree? Before he could respond, Dr. Peterson, the chief of surgery at OHSU and one of our foundation's major donors, approached us. Clara, marvelous event as always, he beamed, shaking my hand warmly before turning to Daniel. Dr. Harding, good to see you supporting such a worthy cause. Have you met Clara Hayes? Her foundation does incredible work supporting literacy in the arts. We're hoping to partner with her on a new pediatric reading program at the hospital. Daniel's expression was a mixture of shock and forced politeness, as Dr. Peterson continued extolling my accomplishments, completely unaware of our shared history. In that moment, standing beside the man who thought I didn't belong, being praised by his own hospital chief for the very community-focused work Daniel would have once dismissed as unimportant, I felt the last vestiges of my old hurt dissolve. He hadn't broken me. He'd inadvertently forged me into someone stronger, someone who defined her own worth. Well, Daniel said stiffly after Dr. Peterson moved on. It seems you've done very well for yourself. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an acknowledgement, wrung from him by the undeniable reality of my success. I found where I belong, I replied simply, meeting his gaze without flinching. Sometimes the places we least expect become the homes our souls were searching for. I excused myself then, leaving him standing alone amidst the celebration I had orchestrated, the life I had built, the community that embraced me. He was the one who looked out of his depth now. As I rejoined my friends, accepting congratulations on another successful gala, I caught Daniel watching me from across the room. A flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or maybe just the dawning realization of what he had thrown away. But his feelings no longer mattered. His chapter in my story was definitively closed. The evening concluded with a presentation honoring Eleanor's legacy and highlighting the foundation's achievements. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the supportive faces of my friends, colleagues, and community members, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey had been painful, the beginning born from betrayal and humiliation. But that painful catalyst had propelled me toward a life richer, more authentic, and infinitely more fulfilling than the one I'd almost settled for. Later that night, curled up on my couch with a cup of tea and Eleanor's worn copy of Austen, I reflected on the journey. Daniel's dismissal at that party years ago had felt like an ending. I'd arrived in Portland broken, lost, questioning my own worth. But Eleanor's kindness, Chloe's acceptance, the collaborative spirit of my friends, and the welcoming embrace of the Portland community had allowed me to rebuild, not just a business, but myself. The bookstore cafe wasn't just a successful venture. It was a testament to resilience, a sanctuary built on the foundations of second chances. The path hadn't been easy, marked by financial struggles, self-doubt, and the lingering ghosts of the past. Yet each challenge overcome, each connection forged, each small victory achieved had solidified my sense of self, grounding me in a way my previous life never could. Seeing Daniel again hadn't reopened old wounds. It had simply confirmed how far I'd traveled. He was a relic from a different life, a reminder of the gilded cage I'd escaped. His surprise at my success spoke volumes about his inability to see beyond superficial markers of worth, the very limitation that had led him to dismiss me in the first place. My success wasn't measured in dollars or status, the metrics Daniel understood, but in community built, passions pursued, and a life lived authentically. Perhaps the greatest irony was that in trying to confine me to a supporting role in his story, Daniel had forced me to become the protagonist of my own. The cruelty intended to diminish me had inadvertently catalyzed my empowerment. I closed the book, the familiar weight comforting in my hands. Tomorrow, I would be back at the cafe, brewing coffee, recommending books, connecting with the community we served. It wasn't the life I had envisioned years ago, but it was real, it was mine, and it was more than enough. Sometimes, not belonging where you thought you should is the greatest gift, pushing you towards where you truly need to be. The key, as Eleanor knew, wasn't in finding the right place, but in building it yourself.